Is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. My guest today, I've known for almost 10 years, and she's a personal friend of Bailey's. Her name is
Aw.
Teresa Whalen, and she is going to tell us so many things like what the animals tell us from the other side, but also she's going to talk about grief, pet grief, because when we lose an animal companion, it's really hard. People don't often understand the same way than if you lose a human family member. And this is something she's done for years, helping people with grief counseling for their pets, which I think is a very important subject, especially as my Bailey's getting older. I want to be prepared. Please welcome Teresa Whalen. It's so nice I mean, I've known you for almost 10 years and we've had many
At
sessions,
least,
but
yeah.
I've never seen you before. And you're very brilliant. I thought, oh, it's Meryl Streep is coming on my show today. How nice. Oh,
Well, it's so nice to be with you and
well,
to
thank
talk to
you.
you in this format. So thank you for having
My
me.
pleasure. I heard about you from Lydia Hibby, who was a guest on the show about 4 years ago, and she thinks highly of your work, and so do I. So, if you want, before we even tell people what you do, maybe a little bit about yourself, because I know you do wonderful things helping whales. You're a vegan, and people love to hear that about our guests.
Okay. Well, why don't I start with the food issue thing? We're vegan
Sure.
because you are, of course, an inspiration to me and so many, many, many people. And I was thinking about this because I figured you would ask about that or want me to speak about it. And for me, I see food choices as a very personal decision because when I think of the progression of the choices I made, which started out being a big meat eater, because that's what I was raised to eat, um, it's a personal decision. And I became a vegetarian when I was 35 um, because when I saw my first whale on a whale watch trip, it just changed my life. And that's a whole different story. But somehow the things he said to me, because he communicated to me, made me realize that I couldn't love my own companion animals and now this group of wild animals called whales and still eat chickens and cows and birds and other animals. It just was a major overnight shift. So I became a vegetarian then, and but still ate dairy. And some years later, when I was educated about the treatment of dairy cows and chickens and so forth, then that was almost an overnight decision. Once I was educated, I was like, I can't do this anymore. But until about 6 years ago, those food choices I made to be a vegan were all based on wanting to help the animals, wanting to not be part of harming animals. It wasn't about my health. And then I had a heart attack, and that changed everything. So
Wow.
then I shifted to a plant-based diet that was geared not just to not harm animals, but for my health, because I had been what I think I've heard you call a junk food vegan for years.
Yes.
It was not good for my weight. It most definitely was not good for my health. So at this point, and then later, um, a bit later after the heart issue, I also had cancer, from which I'm very happy to say I'm completely clear and clean now. But those two things, starting with the heart issue, really shifted how I wanted to eat. And to me, food is medicine. It's really a part. I mean, of course, I enjoy food, but everything I eat needs to be part of my medicine, part of my health, as well as, of course, not harming any animals in any way at all. So that's kind of my story about my eating
Thank
issues.
you.
So,
What attracted you to whales? I mean, they're wonderful, magnificent
oh,
creatures. And your last name is practically
yes,
whale.
it's will, and yes, it's very representative. Well, it wasn't a conscious thing. I saw my first whale on a whale watch trip in Cape Cod off Provincetown in 1988. And I was on vacation with a friend, just having a nice little girls' weekend. Um, and it's very hard to explain this in a short time, but all I can say is meeting that first whale and many others that weekend changed my life. You know how I think all of us who are animal lovers can probably relate to that situation where you meet a certain animal and you just know there's this deep heart connection, this deep soul connection. Well, much to my surprise, that's how I felt with this whale and all humpback whales especially. So that changed me, and that turned into having an eco tour business for a number of years where I facilitated groups of people going to Silver Bank off the Dominican Republic to swim with whales, which I still do every year other than the COVID years, but I don't facilitate the trips anymore. I retired from that role and now I just go myself with loved ones, human loved ones, to enjoy the
When you say
experience.
swim with whales, they're not in captivity, right?
Oh God, no,
Right,
no,
because no, the
no,
reason I
no, no,
say that
no,
is because as
no.
vegans, one
Yeah,
time somebody
yeah,
took me to swim with the dolphins, and I was so mortified. They spent all
yeah,
this money, and this was a horrible experience.
yeah,
They
yeah,
were in captivity, and that's not
yeah.
when I thought about swimming with
Yeah.
dolphins. So
No, no,
they're
these are in the wild. Definitely, it's a very ethical trip where not only are they, of course, in the wild, I'm 1,000% opposed to captivity. So these are wild whales, of course, and it's a very ethical encounter situation because we're in an area, very large 100 square mile area, where there are approximately 5 to 7,000 whales and only 3 boats with 20 people in each boat. So the ratio of whale to human is very much in the favor of the whales. And long story short, we only have encounters with the whales who literally come to us and seek us out. And when we're in the water, there are very strict rules of how we need to be with them and so forth. So and one
so
of the stories I may tell today is a beautiful story of the death of a whale in that wild area.
so are whales are they eat other animals, right? They're not vegan, right?
Well, no, they aren't vegan, but humpback whales and most baleen whales are primarily what we might call vegetarian, but it depends on whether you consider krill an animal, and I suppose they are. They eat herring, they eat small fish. The difference is toothed whales tend to eat larger animals, like orca whales, especially transient orcas, will eat sea lions. They sometimes go after other whales. So there's a difference there, but I think it's safe to say they aren't really vegan. But the humpback
Right.
whales, who are the love of my life, are very peaceful, very gentle. There's never been any account of them intentionally harming a human or any other animal, except the small, small animals that they eat.
Right.
So
Are they friendly towards humans?
absolutely,
Wow.
absolutely. When we're in the water with them, they are so peaceful and so gentle. And here you are in the water with this 50-foot marine mammal weighing many tons who bring their babies to us. The babies are 12 to 15 feet long. So they're these enormous animals, but the energy that one feels, and I've heard this from hundreds of people on my trips over the years, it's just this energy of such grace and love and gentleness. They're very, very gentle. It's quite a privilege, to say the least, to be with them in their home and to exchange love with them. It's the same kind of love we feel with our cats and our dogs and our horses and our other animal companions, but there's a special privilege to it because they're wild and they allow us in their home and actually come to us. So that's pretty special.
That sounds amazing. If you have information on these trips, I'm happy to put it in the show notes. That sounds
Oh,
spectacular.
sure. Well, I will, again, I don't facilitate trips anymore, but there are 3 operators who go to this area off the Dominican Republic. And the one I recommend the most highly is aquaticadventures.com. They are the best operator in Silverbank. So if anybody's interested in it, contact them, tell them I sent you, and you'll have a great time if you go.
That sounds great. So how do you describe what you do? Because I know there'll be people that are like, I'm not watching this. This is woo-woo stuff. And I've had animal communicators on the show before. I even had a psychic once, but I mean, I'm not gonna like not say things that I
Yeah,
believe this
yeah,
because
yeah,
it offends
yeah,
somebody, because
yeah.
I know that this show will help a lot of people, especially I hope Robert, Cheek, and Karen are watching because they're dear friends of mine that just lost their pet after 18 years.
Oh,
The first
I'm
thing I do,
sorry.
yeah, when anybody has a pet that is made their transition, I always have for years have recommended you, and lots of people in the plant-based space that are my colleagues have contacted you, even if they haven't said they came from me. But what do you like on your income tax form? What does it say? What is your
That's a great question. Nobody's
they're
ever asked that.
like,
Um,
what
I
are
put
you?
down grief counselor.
Mhm.
Now, for the IRS, I don't say pet loss grief counselor. I just say grief counselor. But the grief counseling that I do is definitely oriented to the loss of animals. And it may be called pet loss, but I do work with people who are grieving. Like a lot of whales in captivity die because it's such an abusive situation. And I have clients who love particular whales at SeaWorld or other facilities, and the whales die. And so that's included in the grief counseling I do. The other practice I have is in animal communication, very much like Lydia Hibby. I talk with animals who are about to pass. I help their people understand their needs while the person is in anticipatory grief, knowing, oh my gosh, my animal's so ill, they're going to leave sometime soon. And I also speak with animals who've already passed to help their people connect with them. So that's my dual private practice. And some clients come for both services, some come for just one or the other. And in my animal communication practice, I don't limit it to just issues of hospice time and after death, though that's probably about 70% of my practice because people really need that and tend to come to me for it. But I also talk about behavioral issues and simple things like we're going on vacation for 3 weeks. We want the 3 dogs and the cat to know who's going to stay with them and when we're coming back. So it's sort of a wide array. I also have an institute where I teach and certify people who want to become pet loss grief counselors. And that website is petlossgriefcounseling.com. Actually, pet loss grief counseling certificate.
We can, anything you have, we can put in the show notes. So that's spectacular.
Right.
Yeah, the first time I saw, some people call them pet psychics. I mean, they even had, there was even a television show with one, I think Sonia.
Sonia Fitzpatrick. Yeah, years ago.
And I think it was on National Geographic or something like that.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing my first animal communicator, even before I met Lydia Hibby, who referred me to you. This would have been in 1990. And it was Beatrice Lydecker.
She was one of the early people.
Right. And I think Lydia was her protege. And I remember going, it was at a holistic vet on Lancashire. I think it was called Limehouse Veterinary. And I think she lived in Oregon. So she was just coming, for visits. And I'm like, I'm open-minded. I did it. And, a lot of people will say, this stuff is the devil's work, but man, the stuff she said to my dog Lucky at the time, I mean, there is no way anyone could know just meeting me. I mean, it was so specific. It wasn't like, oh, your dog loves you and you love you. Like at the time, I mean, like she basically said, you take him through the drive-through and you get him an ice cream. I mean, how could she know that?
Yeah.
How could somebody I'm just meeting specifically know that I was taking him to a drive-through and getting, I mean, not that I recommend dairy for dogs, but okay, I was much younger there, but how could she know this specific? And then she described like a person that he liked that, like, I mean, it just blew my mind. So this is something that I've always enjoyed, and I've taken an animal communication classes many years at the Pasadena Humane Society. And it's so funny when you get skeptics and they're like even my own veterinarian at the time that, came like this and it's like, and, the people's minds are blown once they're open to it. And so it's very cool. Like, how did you know, how does one have this, like, is this a gift you're born with? Is this something people can learn? Like, has this been your profession for most of your life?
Well, half my life now that I'm 70. I've been doing it since I'm 35.
Wow.
But that's an interesting question. I have been able to talk with animals all my life. And I had a cat from the time I was tiny little toddler. And I could always hear what the cat was saying, and little squirrels and rabbits and birds outside and friends' pets. So yes, it's something that I came to this lifetime remembering how to do. But I really don't think about what I do as a gift. And it's okay when people say that, but I think of it more as an ability. And with that ability, for me, comes a responsibility to use it well, and serve others with something that comes naturally to me to do. So that's how I see it. And your other question, can anybody learn it? Absolutely. Telepathy, which is my preferred term for what really is animal communication, is a natural ability we all have. Telepathy is simply an extension of natural intuition. And I think the only reason, many of us teach it and try to help others learn it is that in our current culture, we've been kind of stripped and sort of repressed to not put in the fore of our minds and our daily lives our intuition. our natural intuitive abilities, but instead to rely entirely on our minds and the left side of our brain. And that part of our brain is really important. Thank God we have that function. But the right side of the brain is just as critical. And when we combine those, when we're willing to combine it, when we learn more about how to do that, it opens up all sorts of avenues in our lives, including, for those of us who love animals, how to connect with them. And can everybody, or would it work for anybody in the world to learn to do this and do it professionally at that level of mastery? Probably not. But one analogy I often use when people ask me that question is, can anybody learn to play golf? Sure. Anybody, and I'm terrible at golf. I did it once and I was terrible and I never did it again. But can anybody take golf lessons and learn? Of course. But that doesn't mean everybody who takes the lessons is going to become Tiger Woods. And when it comes to animal communication, I've had many of my clients over the years take classes with me, and they enjoy it. They learn a bit. They learn how to do some fundamental communication with their animals. But sometimes when it comes to more serious, complex issues, they'll still call an animal communicator, me or somebody else. So, but yes, the short answer is anybody can learn it for sure.
It's interesting because when I lived in LA, I often worked for celebrities, so I can't mention names because you sign these things called NDAs. However, it was so interesting how many of them used animal communicators that maybe didn't believe in them at first, but then when their pets were having issues, or I wish I could say this name of this person because then it would blow your mind. But this person's dog got lost. And I said, listen, I'll pay. Just go to this person. And they found the dog. It was at a certain gas station. She was able to ascertain the exact street. And so it made a believer out of that particular celebrity. So I just think, at the end of the day, it's just fun, for me to be able to talk to Bailey, especially.
Oh, hi, Bailey. Hi.
Do you mind
Hi,
talking to
sweetheart.
people? It's so
You look so
it's
cute.
so fun. Who is your typical client, or is there? I'm guessing because your work is done virtually, you could talk to people all over the world.
I do talk to people all over the world, and thank God for Zoom making that possibly after years of people having expensive phone calls. But there really is no typical client, unless if there's one typical common denominator of my clients, and this is probably the same thing any animal communicator would tell you, and that is people who really love their animals. People who really love them enough to seek out information to help them to improve their lives, to learn their thoughts and their feelings and so forth. So that's the most typical thing.
Would you say it's mostly people with domesticated animals though, like
Oh,
dogs?
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I have had requests to speak with wild animals at sanctuaries, and there's an ethic in the animal communication field that when an animal, and I don't like this term, but legally, when an animal companion is owned by someone, a communicator cannot talk to an animal without that animal's legal guardian's permission. In other words, if I'm taking a walk at the beach, which I do a lot, and I see all kinds of dogs, which is a highlight of my day when I do it, I say hello and make small talk. How are you doing? Just like you would a person who you don't know. But I would never engage in an in-depth conversation because you never know what you're going to hear in an in-depth conversation. It's none of my business what's going on between another animal and their person or their persons. But with wild animals, it's very different. And even wild animals in captivity, because even though they're legally owned by some corporation, it's a very different relationship than an animal companion, a domestic animal companion and their person.
So you have to, so even like if I give permission, you have to actually say to Bailey, hey, do you mind if I talk to you?
No, if you give me permission,
Yeah.
as we have in the past, and we started consultation, I say hello to Bailey. I remind him who I am. And I always say to every animal I speak with, I'm here because your person contacted me, or say your mother, or whatever the person calls themselves, because they want to have a conversation with you. And I'm just going to help you have that conversation because I can hear what you're saying in depth. And the animals usually love it. Sometimes I'm halfway through that little explanation and they just cut me off because they knew what was coming. And they were just ready to talk. So that's how that works.
So that's cool. Did you feel like you had this gift at 35 when you started and then just developed it, or did you like go to somewhere to train?
Well, I always knew I could speak to animals because it was a conscious thing my whole life. But as a little girl, then a teenager, and adult, I wanted to be normal. I hardly told anybody what I did. Almost nobody knew that I could do this. And I certainly wasn't doing it professionally before I was 35. But when I met that whale, everything changed. I remember leaving that trip thinking, I can't hide this anymore. This is too important. I don't know what this means. I don't know where I'm going to go with this, but I'm no longer going to hide the fact that I can talk with animals. And one thing led to it. As soon as I made that decision, that saying, once you are clear about something, the universe steps in and supports you. Well, it happened very quickly. I lived in Philadelphia at the time, and long story short, I found myself within a year of that experience moving to California, where I felt I was supposed to live. And very shortly after that, I met Dr. Jerry Ryan, who was a psychologist and an animal communicator. I should say the late Jerry Ryan. She passed away fairly recently. And I trusted her because before this, I come from a corporate background. And so the thought of leaving this corporate work to becoming an animal communicator was not something that felt really comfortable to me at first. But when I met Jerry, it sort of normalized everything. She wasn't some airy fairy, you know, healing arts ungrounded person. She's a very grounded psychologist. And I'm trained as a therapist. So we had that in common. I trusted her. We became friends very quickly after we first met. And I took some of her classes. I sponsored some of her classes just for the fun of it. And she pulled me aside and she said, Teresa, you have to do this professionally. There aren't enough of us. Because at that time, there might have been like 30 professional animal communicators in the United States. Now there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. But she said, I can't even keep up with the demand. You have to do this. And I was like, very reluctant. I mean, I was excited. I kind of knew I was supposed to, but I was reluctant. And then one time, Jerry went off to some training program for herself for about 2 weeks. And this was in the days of old-fashioned answering machines. And she put my name and number in her answering machine of who to call while she was away. So I started getting her clients calling me, and that was that. I never looked back after that. So
There's somebody watching that knows you. So Lori says, I did a consult with Teresa after my stallion passed away from a traumatic brain injury. I was referred by Lydia Hibby. Just had 2 consults last month with Lydia for our 2 rescue dogs and been using her ever since. And she was referred to me by Beatrice. So it's like you guys it's so nice that y'all work together and refer. And yeah, that's amazing. And so that's great that you had a wonderful experience, Lori. Yeah, but people don't have to wait till their animal crosses over. They can talk to you while their pet's alive.
yeah, yeah. As we were talking about before the show, because it's evolved over a short period of time when I started this work, that I became somewhat of a specialist in grief and loss and afterlife communication. So because of that, I'd say about 70% of the clients who come to me come when they're experiencing anticipatory grief before their animals pass, but they know it's coming. And it's very lovely for me to work with those people because they come to me because they want to know what's best for their animal during that period. From little things, not little, but things like, are you still in pain? Do you need us to up the pain medications? To the big, big question of when it's time for you, do you prefer euthanasia or do you prefer to leave on your own? Things like, do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? And if so, where would you like to be buried? What do you want us to do with your ashes? So those are big, important questions that, in my experience, give people a lot of comfort having clarity on what their animal wants during this very sacred and challenging time that we sometimes call hospice period. Um, and then, of course, we can also speak with animals after they leave their bodies when they're on the other side. And when I say other side of the spirit world or heaven, those words, of course, are all interchangeable depending on our preferences and our spiritual or religious belief system. So I'm not suggesting just one term is correct. Um, but for me, and I know each animal communicator is a little different about this, but to me, um, a soul is a soul is a soul. And when I connect with an animal, it's at their soul level, even though I still perceive their adorable personalities. So, because of connecting with the soul, it doesn't matter where that soul resides when I speak with them. They can reside in a body and be on earth, or they can be out of their body on the other side. So, that's it doesn't make a difference to me. It's the exact same kind of communication.
It's so interesting though, because I've taken the classes for years and I can talk to pets that I don't like to do this professionally because I don't want to be wrong, but I'm able to do it to the living, but I've never been able to talk to pets that have crossed over.
Mhm. Well,
Like
and
even my
some
own.
communicators feel that way too. And I think perhaps for me, it's always been very easy because even as a little girl, I just could always sense souls on the other side who visited. When a friend's cat died, I could talk to that cat without thinking about it. When I was in second grade, a little classmate passed away from leukemia over the summer. And when we got back to school, the teachers very solemnly let us know he had died. And I immediately saw him in the room talking to us, and he was fine. And it didn't seem weird. It only started feeling weird to me when I became like a teenager and I wanted to be normal. But it's just something that's always been easy. And one thing that actually was part of some of the trends that I'd like to talk about today is that many of us have often heard the term about there being a veil between earth and heaven. That veil meaning it's sometimes challenging to see and hear and communicate with beings in heaven or the other side because of this veil. But for me, there never was a veil. And I think for a lot of people, there's never been a veil. A lot of psychics who specialize in speaking with people on the other side, there's just no veil. The nice thing to tell people right now is one of the trends that I hear about stories from animals on the other side is that from the perspective of being in heaven on the other side, with our animals, for instance, who've left their bodies and are there looking at us, there's no veil. There's no veil. And I say that with a smile because it's so easy and natural and automatic for souls on the other side to easily perceive and see and visit and communicate with loved ones still on earth. It's much easier from that side to earth than from earth to the other side. So I hope that helps people hearing that. It's really lovely.
So I want to read this comment from someone named Kathy saying, I'd love to connect with my dear horse, Larry, who was my riding partner for 24 years. Does it matter when a pet or even a person, if you talk to, I don't know if you talk to to humans as well, does it matter how long they've been gone, your ability to connect with them?
No. And the reason it doesn't matter, well, one way to describe it is in the spirit world, there's no linear time. There's no linear time at all. And so the amount of time that has passed from when a soul leaves the earth to the other side doesn't matter at all when you connect with them. It's not nearly as hard, even though it's easier today, to try to find some classmate or some person you used to be friends with 40 years ago. You look online, that's easier today than it used to be, of course, but it still takes some effort to connect with the soul who's on the other side, no matter when they died, no matter when they left their body on earth. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. In fact, sometimes people they ask me to connect with an animal. Lots of times people will say, well, now that we've talked to the one who died recently, I'd like a session to connect with my dog when I was a young child who
That's what
died.
I did after I met you and you did the one that I was so grief stricken. I got to tell you,
Yeah.
it helped me so much to talk to you because, it's funny because you probably hear this a lot, but every dog I have, I say, this is like the best dog I ever had. It's like, it's like, and I'll never be able to live without them. And that was my Sparky because he was my service dog and he was so special. And yet, talking to you so soon after he crossed over and having you say things that nobody could, there's no way, because we didn't know each other at the time. That was when I was first meeting you. I mean, and I doubt Lydia Hibby called you up and said, hey, by the way, he's a terrier or whatever. It blew both our minds, myself and Charles, but it allowed me to heal so much more quickly that I was able to adopt Bailey in 2 weeks, honestly, and then we went back and literally you talked to every dog I have ever had. So that was really, really fun. And it's fun how you kind of like you almost become their personality in a way, like the way you deliver what you say. It's like, that's him, that's her. So
About that, yeah, I kind of do that without thinking because in addition to the words, I feel their energy and their personalities come through. So I can't help but not mimic it, but really try to convey that energy that I'm hearing.
it cracked me up because I remember when we talked to and we kind of went in order. So I went backwards with how recently they passed. And we did go all the way back to my 5-year-old dog. And I mean, the stuff you said was just mind blowing. So you did Sparky, Ginger, who was before Ginger? I can't Scooby, Lucky, Snoopy. So, but the funny thing is when you did Ginger, who was the dog that actually lived with Sparky, but she passed first, like the first thing out of your mouth was, she's sorry she was such a bad dog. And she really was. I mean, she couldn't help it, I suppose. But I mean, of all the dogs I had, she was the problem child. And she was just like the first thing you said is, she's really sorry she was such a bad dog. And I'm like,
you never know what they're going to say.
Yeah.
You never, it's completely unpredictable, just like talking with humans. It's just an unpredictable thing.
It's so fun. Well, do you ever get sad when you're doing your job?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Because I probably am exposed to the sadness of the humans much more than sadness of animals because, the humans are grieving or they're anticipating the death of their animal, even if they haven't died yet. So I feel that. But when I feel deep emotion of animals, which takes a lot of energetic protection to deal with, is when an animal's been abused or an animal's been abandoned. Because I do a great deal of volunteer work for shelter animals who don't have their own person anymore. And so many of those animals are there because some person dumped them, some person abandoned them, or not intentionally abandoned them, but they died without any plans for that animal's care. So they ended up in a rescue group or a shelter group or whatever. So that's when I feel tremendous, not just sadness, but trauma on the part of the animals. And that may be the hardest work I do and the most rewarding. Because if one can work with and help an animal who's come to believe they are worthless because of how they've been treated, and you can help them see and learn that they are a magnificent soul. And just because some human or humans treated them in some abominable way does not mean they're worthless, that it's something about that person, not them. That is an incredible privilege to be able to do that. And of course, it's not like it happens overnight in one conversation, but even if you can help an animal in that situation have a glimmer of how lovable and how worthy and magnificent they are, despite how they were treated, that's a great gift to be able to do that. And
I'm
very
curious.
emotional.
Yeah. That would make me so sad, I think. I can't even walk by the meat section or the fish section at a store or go to a zoo or anything like that. You mentioned, and I didn't realize it, that you can't talk to animals without the permission of whoever, and I don't like this word either, owns them, because I don't feel like we own them. I feel like they own us, actually, if anything. But do they ever just talk to you because they know what what you can do? And so does ever a bird say, hey, lady, I got to tell you something?
Well, it does happen with wild animals sometimes, because this isn't proven, but my own experience has been that when an animal perceives that they're around somebody who hears them and is open, they do sometimes come talk to you. However, there's an extremely strong ethic, boundary ethic in the world of animal communication, and that is if it's some bird that says, hey, I want to tell you something, and that happens to me when I walk on the beach and it's great fun. But the ethic is it's never okay for me or anyone else, a professional communicator or somebody who just does it informally. It's never okay to have an in-depth conversation with somebody else's animal unless that person asks us to do that. So I keep that very well boundaried. And let me give you an example. People will ask me occasionally, well, now that we talk to my dog and my cats, could you talk to the next door neighbor's dog because they bark all the time, and could you ask them to stop? I'm very sympathetic to that kind of situation. I said, I'm so sorry, I can't do that because that dog belongs to your neighbor. And that's just not ethically okay for me to do. And let me tell you why. Because you might think, well, so what? Just have a nice little conversation with the dog and explain the barking, and maybe they'll stop or lower it a little bit. But the reason is, just like when we start up a conversation with a human, whether it's on an airplane or an acquaintance over dinner or whatever, we never know what the person's going to talk about, how deep they might go. It's the same thing with an animal. And an example of this is one of my students. I used to have practice groups every month for people who went through my classes. I don't do that anymore, but when I did, it was very instructive. The people learned a lot because we went deep, deep, deep every month. And this one person came back and said, well, I did my practices this month. I'm so happy to tell you, I did talk to my neighbor's dog who was barking a lot. And we had a big, long conversation. And this person had no idea how much she violated ethics when she was, even though she had learned them, it kind of went over her head. And she said, yes. And I found out this poor dog is very upset because when daddy goes to work, he said, well, mommy has this man who comes and visits her and they go in the bedroom. And, you know, and she
Oh
said, and
my
she
God.
actually said, I'm thinking of telling my neighbor, the man, the husband who's being cheated on. Well, I stopped it in the tracks. Thank God she didn't do anything yet. And we had a very diplomatic, I mean, I wanted to say, oh my God, you should not have done that. But I said it more tactfully, but really let her and everybody in that group know that's never okay. So that's an example of how when you go in to speak to an animal about something like barking, you don't know what they're going to talk about. You have no idea what they're going to bring up. And that personal information is not the business of this person who was my student. And plus, when you get that information, what do you do with it? Now, she was going to do something quite terrible with it, but um, it, the point is, it would. Here's an analogy. Let's just say I was not an animal communicator, but I was a family therapist. And I'm at dinner with some friends. There's a bunch of people around the table, and one of them has a child. And let's say I specialize in children and family therapy, and I start seeing some things that are maybe dysfunctional about this child and the relationship with the mother and the child. Can you imagine how absurd and wrong it would be if I started saying in front of everybody or even privately to the mother, I'd like to tell you about the dysfunctional things I see between you and your child and what you need to do to fix it. You know, it's so the role of the family therapist, of course, to be you only work with people and give them feedback on their issues when they hire you to do so. It's the same thing in animal communication. So it's very important to keep those boundaries.
So you probably, what you hear is probably not admissible in court.
Well, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So anyway, and thankfully that does not come up often, but I'm pretty strict about that because people do ask me sometimes to speak to somebody else's animal. Thankfully, sometimes they'll ask me that before the session in the written information they send, so then I can contact them and say, I'm so sorry, I can only do this if you get so-and-so's permission. And 9 times out of 10, it is something appropriate. Like they just want to use part of their paid session to help a friend get an answer or two from their dog or cat or horse or rabbit or whatever. And so when I say, please get permission of this person, then we can do it. And then they get the permission and we go ahead. So
Yeah.
that's how that works.
That is so interesting. So there's a comment or question from a live Instagram viewer named Porter. Hi, Porter. Do you believe in good and evil souls? And is there something we need to do to protect ourselves from evil?
Oh, good question. Um, Evil is a very heavy word, which I use very sparingly. And I won't mention who, but there may be a handful of people in the world who I would consider to be evil, where their psychopathology, their sociopathy is so extreme and hurts so many people. I would call it evil. You might think of Hitler, or perhaps a more common day politician whose name I
Yeah.
won't mention. But so do I personally believe in that there is evil in the world? Yes. But what I would do is distinguish between a soul. I don't believe in evil souls. I believe all souls are beautiful, beautiful, and have a purity. But the way someone behaves in a given lifetime on the earth can be pure evil and really harm a lot of beings. It happens. So I hope that answers the first part of the question. And the second part is, what can we do to protect ourselves from that? Well, that depends on the situation. One is avoid, try not to be in the energy field or the physical or any presence of that person. And the other one is when we can't help that. And this would even be for things less severe than what we might call evil. When somebody's just really dysfunctional and creates chaos and harm everywhere they go, is to just learn what I call the skill of energetic protection. And it's when we have an intention to have a field of protection all around us every day. And through that field, we can see what's going on. We can offer our love and compassion to anyone. We can see who they are. And with these dysfunctional, evil people that you're mentioning, we can see that. But when we're energetically protected, it can't come into us. It can only come this far and then not harm us. So that's a whole other discussion about how to do that, but that's very doable. We don't have to be harmed by those people. I know it gets very complicated. Maybe it's somebody in your family, maybe it's a boss, somebody you work with. Sometimes it's not possible to literally avoid. So that's when we really need to learn how to protect ourselves so that when we don't have a choice to avoid them, we can be okay in their presence. So hope that helps.
Thank you. So one of the viewers watching live on YouTube was talking about their pot-bellied pig that Laura says the pot-bellied pig, Will, is going through a very painful, stressful ordeal with surgery for tusk extraction, very invasive. He sure could use some help right now. So this is something she could call you and have a session, and you could maybe help her with something like that.
Well, yes, any animal communicator could. And what I would recommend to this person, whether they do this with their pig personally or get the help of an animal communicator, is first and foremost to let this animal know on such and such a day, I'm going to take you to this place called a veterinary hospital, or a place. What I often say to animals when they go to the vet is, your person's going to take you to a place where there are experts in pig bodies, in this case, a pig. People who studied for many years to understand your body. I'm going to take you there. You're going to be there for a day or a few hours or 2 days, whatever you know it to be. And you'll be put in a sleep state. So you'll be very comfortable when they work on you. I don't show scalpels or even talk about surgery. Just say these people with their hands are going to work on you and help you get better. And then I'll be there to pick you up and bring you home. It's also important post-surgery to let them know what to expect. I don't know about pigs, but I know with cats and dogs a lot, they have to wear collars so they can't lick the incision. It's always good to let them know about that so they don't wake up wondering, what the heck is this big thing on my head, or even the smaller donut ones. To just let them know what's happening when they come home. Maybe they'll be confined. Because sometimes after surgery, they aren't allowed to run around or whatever. So maybe the pig would be in a confined area or a crate. Maybe there are medicines that have to be given. Very nice to give them a heads up about that. So that's the logistics part of it. But perhaps even more importantly is to also ask them some questions yourself or with the help of an animal communicator, how they're feeling, what's their discomfort level and where. And oftentimes I will ask my clients when they say they have an animal in a difficult situation physically, are they already getting any pain medication? And how do they give it? Is it oral? Is it a shot? Is it a patch? How often? So I can let the animal know on the person's behalf, that's why you're getting this. That's why you're getting it, because it's meant to reduce your level of discomfort. And what's nice is if you talk with your pig before that and you find out, oh yeah, I don't have any pain, then you know if you're giving pain meds, they're working. If they say, no, I'm still in a lot of pain, then you know you have to up it. So that's a very sort of quick overview of some things you might cover. And well, one other thing I thought of, sometimes animals are having surgery because of something they did, like they ate something they weren't supposed to eat, like sponges or rubber gloves or their person's underwear. and they're going in to have their intestine sectioned. So I'm going through this right now with a dear friend whose dog did that and had to have major, major, major surgery. And so now there are ongoing talks with animals about, do you remember how serious that was and how much pain you were in beforehand? And that's the result of when you eat non-food items. So sometimes if a medical condition is going on because of the behavior of the animal, it's really nice to talk with them about that in depth so they know. So I hope that
I
helps,
think
and I
about
wish
that
your pig well.
when I was young, that was one of my favorite movies, Dr. Dolittle, the ability to talk to animals.
Yeah.
Because even though I've taken the classes and I can do it to like somebody else's, I can never talk to my own. It's like I still have to go to you guys, like Lydia and you. And it's like, because I don't, why is it, why does it seem, at least for me, that it's harder to talk to my loved one pets
Okay.
than somebody else's?
I was just going to ask you if you wanted to know that. And that is extremely common because, and here's the quick answer, because when we're speaking with our own animals, we have a vested interest. If it's the same topic, let's say, let's say it's a cat who wakes their person up at 4 o'clock in the morning to eat when the person doesn't want to wake up until 5:30 or 6. If I'm talking to somebody else's cat about that, that's a breeze. I get really clear, what the person wants the animal to know. It might be, look, I'm losing sleep and that's making me sick, or whatever the reason is for not wanting to be woken up at 4 o'clock. And then I explain to the cat why it's so important to the person. That's a piece of cake for me to do with great compassion for the cat and the person when it's not my cat. I have a cat who does that. And when I talk with him, it's much more challenging because I get mad and I get sleep deprived. So it's just, the short answer is we have a vested interest when it's our own animal, and take it from something not too serious as being woken up early in the morning to something like your animal's really ill. And you're wondering, are they so ill they're getting ready to leave? Or is it something less than that? That's a major issue to talk to our animals about. So, of course, it's more challenging to do with your own animals. So, there's nothing wrong with you, Chef AJ. That's
Yeah,
normal.
right.
Everybody talks about that.
Definitely
And
don't
in
want to
fact,
be wrong.
professional animal communicators will often seek each other out and I hire colleagues sometimes to help me because I'm stuck. I'm just so frozen in my worry or whatever. And that's normal. That's normal.
Yeah.
So
I remember because in my 20s and 30s, I was a pet sitter, and I've been taking these classes for years. They're just so much fun. And Lydia does them on Zoom now. Do you do any on Zoom?
I don't at this point, but because I'm writing a couple of books right now too, and my time is so scrunched and limited. But I've been thinking a lot lately, and I keep getting these messages. It's time to
Yeah. Oh,
teach again.
I will be the first to
So
sign up and
I
take
think later this year I'll probably do some teaching and in
that.
person and or on Zoom. I don't know, but it's time to get. I mean, I do a lot of teaching around the grief stuff, but I haven't taught an animal communication class in years. I used
That
to
would,
do it all the time.
that
I
would be
do have online an introduction to animal communication class. It's only about 4 hours, but I got involved in the grief teaching because so many people already teach animal communication, and I didn't have time to do both in a big way. So the last number of years, I did most of my teaching in the grief and loss and healing field.
yeah.
But
Well, that's such an important
um,
space because people, when I say people, those of us that get it. But in the regular world, if you lose a pet, it's like, yeah, it's just a dog. I mean, my God, it's like,
yeah, not
God.
to the people who lose it.
I
Yeah,
mean, it was so
yeah.
funny because yesterday we had a big potluck, and I remember saying that, like Bailey's my number one, then I got sushi, and then Charles. Like, I'm not kidding, of course, I love Charles as much, but he feels the same thing about her too. And it's like, I think that's why people, especially people that are vegan, really, like can relate to some of this because we
Yeah,
don't see
yeah,
animals as food and we see them as
yeah,
family members. I
yeah,
remember in
yeah.
my 20s, I was a pet sitter, and the lady was out of town. I couldn't reach her, and I just clearly her cat was sick, and I didn't know what it was, what was, and I felt like I didn't know you had to have permission, but I had to talk to the cat,
Mhm.
and all the cat kept showing me, like in my head, was like, it looked like a kidney bean, like a can of, like, red kidney bean. And I
Mhm.
told it to the vet, and the cat was in kidney failure. It was like amazing.
That's
Like the cat
incredible.
actually
Yeah,
told me. And I'm
yeah.
like, why is this cat sending me a picture of a red
That's
kidney bean?
fantastic. That
So
is
that's, and
fantastic.
even the vet believed it then. And this was
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
vet went on to take
yeah,
Lydia's class. I said,
yeah.
and he couldn't believe this.
That's
So,
fantastic. It's
do
also, by the way, an example of the exception to that ethical rule not to talk to somebody else's animal. That animal was in your care and you couldn't reach the person.
right.
So, in my opinion, what you did was absolutely
Yeah.
perfect.
I'll
So,
never forget that. It's been cool. So, do you ever talk to food animals, and how do they feel about? I mean, I don't know if you ever talk to, like, cage, like all the animals that are tortured and abused for food. Do you
I
could
have, I have.
are they
And
happy about their situation? I
no,
can't. Yeah.
no, no, no. And it's very challenging to talk to them. Now, when I see cows out in a pasture, they have those little things in there. They aren't like pet cows. They're cows, and they aren't dairy cows that already be chained up to machines. They're beef cows, and I always send love to them when I drive by, and I stop sometimes and just tell them I hope they have a wonderful life, and I certainly don't reveal them. By the way, somebody's going to kill you in another 6 months or whatever and eat you, but because they may not know that. So I don't tell them that to put fear into them, but I do say, "Oh, I'm just sending you so much love, and my prayer for you is that you have wonderful, blissful days every day of your life. And when the day comes that it's time for you to leave your body, I hope it will be swift and easy and painless." But I have spoken to some animals in slaughterhouses. I talked to a lot of birds who are chickens, um, and dairy animals, dairy cows, and it's very hard to do, um, because as many of your vegan guests may know, what happens with dairy is babies are immediately taken from their mothers, and the grief that both feel is unconscionable. It's horrible. And it goes on and on and on as long as the dairy farmer can continue to exploit the female cow to continue getting cow milk to sell to humans who don't need cow milk. Um, that suffering is daily, and it's horrible. And when I learned that is when I stopped eating dairy, because I didn't know. Well, I thought very naively was, well, they don't kill them. I'm not eating hamburgers, so I'm good. But when I learned that, and then I talked to a few of them, that was that. I couldn't eat anything dairy ever again. So
Yeah. Oh, here's an interesting question from an Instagram viewer. Do you use actual words when you communicate? Do the animals actually use language, or do you just talk to them in pictures?
good question. I'll start to answer that by saying the heart of telepathy is not words. The heart of telepathy is pictures, but however you describe picture, image, whatever, and feelings. That's the heart of telepathy. Feelings and images. And because of that, I feel so grateful to the animals who will also use words. And my theory is the reason they do it is number one, animal companions learn our language, so they hear us talking. But even then, it doesn't explain everything too logically because I speak to people over the world where the human speaks English to me, because that's the only language I know. But when they speak in their household, in their animal, they speak French or Czech or German or whatever it is. Um, I think the animals have this innate ability and wisdom. When somebody connects with them telepathically, which is heart to heart, soul to soul, there's this like translation process that happens. They'll give words because we need some words to understand everything. Like when you saw the kidney bean, that was fantastic. But to have a really detailed conversation with an animal, which is the difference between a psychic reading and a telepathic conversation. A psychic reading is when somebody who's able um, reads the energy of an animal or a person. And then this is the part I don't like, then they interpret what that energy means and tells their human client, this is what's going on. It's that interpretation process that makes me uncomfortable because it's not our job to interpret the data, it's our job to explain it. So in a telepathic conversation, that's what happens. So Are there words? Yes. And sometimes, here's an example that might help your viewer. Um, Years ago, I remember saying to an animal right after I introduced myself, your person, and the animal was really ill. And the person wanted to know the extent of it. And so I said to the person, I'd like to start by just asking your animal how they're feeling in general. And then we'll get more specific from there. And the person, that's fine. So I asked this animal, I believe it was a cat. And she said, well, no, she just showed me. She didn't use words at first. She just showed me tiredness, tiredness, deep tiredness. So that message is very clear to me. I felt that energy because when I say pictures, it's not always like a picture of a barn. It's sometimes an energy picture. Just like when you walk into a room, um, and maybe you, AJ, will walk in the room and you'll see Charles and not a words exchange, but you can feel his energy. Maybe you
Yeah.
can feel that he's tense or he's happy or he's sad or whatever. That's feeling energy. And that's part of telepathy. And it doesn't always have to do anything to do with body language. You just feel the energy. So this cat was sending me a very clear energy picture of tired, tired, really tired. So then I use words to get more. Because if I just said to my human client, well, they're tired, 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 what the heck does that mean? So I said to the cat, can you tell me more? And the cat just showed me the same thing. So then I said, well, it will really help your person if you could help me understand, are you tired right now because you're sleepy and it's a temporary kind of tired? Or are you tired all the time and more deeply than being sleepy? You see the distinctions? That was like my first question. And this cat came back with words and said, I'm much more tired than sleepy. I'm tired to my bones and I can't stay in this body much longer. So that's an example of starting out with the energy picture, but moving on to specificity and words. Telepathy is the most elegant language on the planet. And all animals, by the way, communicate telepathically. That's their first language. Of course, they have their sounds and their body movements, which are also important, and they certainly help humans understand some things. But the real heart of any communication with animals is telepathy. But as elegant as it is, as much as I love it, there are so many times when our language as humans of using words can help us be more specific with the animal or what they're trying to tell us. So I'm very grateful when they use words, and I always thank them.
Yeah. So is there any way we can help all the animals that are being used for food or in animal experimentation? I mean, sending them love, it's like, I mean,
Okay. Well, if I can, I'll broaden that question to how we can do that for any animal in trauma, whatever that trauma is. And of course, you're talking about a very specific trauma of animals being exploited and abused and harmed for food.
or like bullfighting or
Oh yeah,
circuses or
yeah.
rodeos.
Anything that we feel like that, absolutely. Um, and I learned a bit of what I'm going to share years ago. I was in a whale watch trip with some friends in New England, same place I saw my first whale. And we're like half an hour into the trip, and there was a dead whale on the beach, not far from the boat. And I could hear my one friend say to her girlfriend, oh my God, don't let Teresa see that whale. She's going to like melt down. And I heard her say that. So I looked over, and then the naturalist in the boat started explaining, we don't know now, but we will be examining this whale to find out, is it death because of a ship strike? Is it because of entanglement? Is it from toxins that they didn't know? But in that example, the majority of deaths of whales on the earth are from human intervention. Not all, but almost all. And because I love them so much as family, I saw this whale and became distraught immediately. But the first emotion that popped up was anger, because I knew it was very likely human caused. And there's a whale who is what I would call a spirit guide to me, the whale on the other side, who helps me with a lot. And he immediately came to me and basically coached me through this and said, your anger is legitimate, but that's not going to help the whale. That's not going to help the mother grieving, because it was a calf. It's not going to help the mother who's grieving. It's not going to help the soul of the whale. And he said to me, there's going to be a time for your anger, but it's not first. You have to put that at the bottom of your list. And the first thing you need to do is consciously put your anger and your grief aside and be there first for the mother of that calf, because we saw an adult swimming in circles and vocalizing near the beach. It was the mother, and she was in acute grief. So my spirit guide said to me, you want to help? Then don't wallow in your anger first. You'll have time to deal with your anger, but not first. You need to put that aside, give what you know to give, the compassion and love and care to that mother. So I did. And it really seemed to help her. And I asked her permission to speak with the soul of her calf. And she said, I'd love that. So I spoke to the soul. And this, as is the case 99.9% of the time, the soul on the other side was perfectly fine and well, because there's no, the suffering that we feel on earth, even if the death involves a lot of suffering, doesn't carry on to the other side. There is no pain, there is no suffering at all on the other side. So the calf was okay, mostly worried about his mother. So I spent about an hour talking with both of them, and helping her mostly with her grief. And it wasn't until I went home that I realized, okay, now it's time for me to tend to my own upsetness about this. And interestingly, because I did what I was guided to do and help the what we call the primary grievers in a situation, I was a secondary griever. It wasn't my baby who died. It was the whale's mother's baby who died. But once I got to that, what I consider a sacred place inside, where I go when I speak to animals, it's a place that I call the deepest emotional chamber of the heart. And we have these physical chambers of the heart, but I think there are emotional chambers of the heart. And the deepest one takes us to the deepest place in our heart. And to me, it sits right next to the soul. And when I'm able to go to that place, which I try to in every conversation, my issues almost automatically go to the wayside for a while. But when I went back to deal with my own anger and my own grief, what I found was the anger had gone from this big to this big. It just wasn't as big anymore because my energy had been spent connecting with those who really needed help. And I still need, and then I had my own grief to deal with too. But what I learned that day was not that our anger doesn't matter, not by any means. I would, in a million years, never suggest that somebody suppress their anger, forget that it's there. That's a new age horror show that a lot of new age practitioners try to teach people is, oh, anger is a bad emotion. You shouldn't feel anger. I would never suggest that to somebody. There's no such thing as a bad emotion. There's no such thing as a wrong emotion. When we feel anger, there's a reason. But what I learned that day regarding that specific situation is just be very careful about who and what you deal with first. And your question was, how do we help the animals in trauma? First thing we have to do is put our own emotions aside temporarily, not pretend they aren't there, but temporarily put our stuff aside so we can be first and foremost with those animals in trauma, including perhaps a soul on the other side. And then we deal with our stuff. So I could say more about that, but does that answer what you were asking about?
I hope so. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So here's a question from Dixie. Dixie, thanks for all the great food yesterday. Do you have an opinion on reincarnation? And Vi says, do you believe that pets can get reincarnated? My present cat looks and acts like our previous cat, except they're different colors and but similar markings.
Yes, I do believe in reincarnation. When I started my practice, I didn't like have a belief about it one way or the other. I never really thought about it. I had a strong belief in God at the time I started my practice, but I really didn't have any alignment to any particular religion or spiritual belief, including metaphysical beliefs. So I was just sort of this open slate. But once I started talking to animals, even in the first year, oh my gosh, I heard what I call just natural organic stories of reincarnation that made me believe, well, yeah, it happens because I hear these stories. And one of the things I learned is that it's not bad, but it's not terribly useful to just constantly be seeking, well, what was I before my current lifetime, or what was my animal in all their past lives? There's nothing wrong with asking that, but what I found is much more instructive and healing and useful is when an animal tells us something about a past life that has something to do with the current life. And I can give an example of that in a moment. But regarding what you talked about, that's very typical for very beloved animals to come back. And especially when they act the same in critical ways, or their energy seems the same in critical ways. If they look different, that's not a big deal. It's the soul that returns, not the body. Reincarnation is not cloning, it's a decision of a soul to come back to Earth. And with companion animals, because sadly they don't live as long as we do, that coming back is very often a conscious choice to come back and be with us again. And I think even if nobody ever checked any of this with an animal communicator or on their own, I believe that on the unseen level, on the unconscious level, two souls make an agreement they're going to be together again. They're going to be together again. And so they do. And I have lots of sessions with clients asking their animal if they want to come back. When the animal says yes, they ask lots of questions about what's the right timing, what kind of body you're going to have, blah, blah, blah. And that can be very reassuring to everybody. But what I also believe is that when two souls love each other deeply, make that decision to come back together, that's going to happen whether you ever talk to them telepathically. It's just going to happen. And I also have memory of lives long, long ago when it wasn't even a matter of did we all believe in reincarnation? It was just a natural thing. And, like in our current lives today, how sometimes you meet a person and you think, oh my God, I feel like I know you. I just met you, but I feel like I know you. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean you had a past life together, but it's one big indicator that maybe you did. So it happens with animals and with people. And what choked me up a little bit is I've had some experiences where there have been people and animals who I love very, very much, and learned that concept that when love is that big and that profound, there's always reunion. Always.
Nice.
Sometimes it's the reincarnation while we're still alive and the one who died comes back. Sometimes it's when we're on the other side and then we have other lives together, whatever. But reunion, from everything I've been shown over 35 years, is inevitable. And so if there's anything I might leave with any of you about this is when someone you love dies, don't ever doubt you're still connected. What we grieve when someone we love dies so much is the loss of their presence in our daily lives, their physical presence, their energetic presence in our daily lives. It hurts. It's horrible. They leave, there's this big void and hole that's left in our lives, which we're then tasked to heal over time. But the connection beyond the physical and beyond that grief that we understandably feel, that spiritual and emotional connection when there's been great love, never, ever, ever goes away, ever. It's just always there. It's always there. And there's always reunion. There's always reunion. One more thing I want to say about this, which is really important. Even in those situations, and I would imagine a lot of you out there might have had this experience where someone you love that intensely dies, animal or person, and you think, well, I'm going to have to go on my life, and I will, but I'll never, ever be able to love like that again. I'll never love another dog like that or another human like that. And even if we accept that, and I'm not saying we would say that as a martyr, but we just have this belief that, well, I'll never love like that again. I had this love and that's wonderful, but it'll never happen again. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it does. And people will say to me when it's a companion, oh my God, I almost feel a little guilty because I don't think I could ever love somebody as much as I love Fluffy. And
And
what Fluffy on the other side would say to that, because I have people have me talk to their animals saying, oh my God, is it okay that I love this new cat or dog or horse now as much as I love them? There is no jealousy on the other side. There's no ownership. There is only unconditional love and peacefulness. And every time I talk to a human or an animal about that issue, they're always so happy for their human that they are now in a new, deeply loving relationship. So you don't have to worry about feeling or betraying the one we loved before or feel guilty. There's no need for that. The heart doesn't isn't just made up of pieces of a pie, and when they're all gone, you can't love that much again. The heart expands to love more and anew. So, but uh, with every ounce of me, I believe and I have seen that yes, when there's been great love, reunion always happens. Always.
that makes me feel happy
Good.
to
Good.
hear that. But still, I don't want to lose. That's the thing of physical presence. I don't, oh
Yeah.
gosh,
Yeah.
it's so hard. Do you
Yeah.
help people in grief counseling with just the loss of pets or even humans?
Um, Mostly pets. I when I work with people who've lost a human, it's usually because they started out as a pet client or somebody referred them to me. And I like doing both, but I don't advertise or promote at all the work with humans, not because I don't love doing it, but I don't want to have so many clients asking for that I don't have time to work with the animals
Of
because the
course.
animals are my first love. But loss is loss and grief is grief. It's all the same. So yeah, and there's some people whose human loved ones on the other side, I help talk with them too. So
Okay, so here's an interesting question because it's in the chat from a live viewer, but it actually is also from somebody that sent it in advance. So Vi, who's watching live, says, does Teresa believe our deceased pets communicate with us in the present through leaving us a sign? And a viewer wrote in, let's see their name. I can't find their name. Maris says, I want to know about my pet Lola, who I lost in October. I've been talking to a pet communicator, and she gave me the message that Lola wants me to pay attention, like she's giving me signs that she's okay, but I don't see them. I just want to see the signs she's giving me. Do you have any advice how to be more on the wavelength of my pets that have
oh,
crossed over?
okay. Well, first of all, I want to say I'm so sorry for your loss. Very sorry for your loss. And I also understand that natural desire to have some signs. And that can be particularly helpful for people who haven't yet, what I call, remembered their telepathic abilities. So if you can't have daily conversations, those signs can be really, really helpful. And when you're hearing from a communicator, oh, your animal is sending signs, but you aren't seeing them or perceiving them. What I would recommend is this, to ask your animal yourself, right from your heart, if they could please send you some signs that would be discernible to you, because it would bring you comfort to know that they're visiting, that they're sending you signs that they're okay and that you're still connected. And the key word is discernible, because they might be sending all kinds of signs, but they just aren't ones that you're perceiving or discerning. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So that's what I recommend to my clients a lot is, and when I'm on the line with the animal, I ask them that too. The thing I recommend not asking is giving them a list of things you want them to do or expect them to do, like please run around the dining room table 3 times counterclockwise, then I'll know it's you. Of course, that's a silly example, but um, it's better to say, in my opinion, could you send me some signs that I could easily discern so I know it's you? And the other thing I want to say is that when it comes to signs, which help all of us, I mean, I can speak to my animals on the other side and people I love on the other side very easily. And still, when I get signs, it's extremely helpful. A human loved one of mine died not that long ago, um, perhaps 2 years. And sometimes on my walks, he'd send me feathers, and I see these, I mean, feathers where there shouldn't be feathers, like inland where there's no seabirds or no birds with white feathers, and I'd find these feathers. And I knew immediately they were from him. I could just feel it. But that's a physical sign. Those physical signs are lovely. Other examples are when you feel you're on your bed, for instance, and you feel the weight of your dog on the other side walking on the bed. You know how you can feel that when you're sleeping. And the dog's not there, but you feel that. Or you might feel their breath on your face or smell it. Or there have been lots and lots of examples that are indisputable to the person. I remember years ago, a woman said after her cat died, she couldn't face cleaning out and throwing away the litter in the litter box for a good while. But she definitely remembered the last time she looked because it was the day her cat died. And when she went a week or so later to clean it out, there was a clump of litter literally in the shape of a heart. In the
Wow.
shape of a heart. It was just, I mean, it's not like her husband made some little shape just to be funny. The cat came back and did that. There are, things like seeing rainbows. People will tell me their animal dies and immediately see a rainbow in the sky. There are all kinds of things. I remember a woman whose husband died, actually, who her husband loved country western music and she didn't like it. And they had this deal that in his car they'd play country western music, and in her car they'd play whatever she liked, I forget. And after he died, she got in her car, turned on the radio, and it was playing country western music on Sirius. And she never listens to it. She hated it. And it was her husband. Um, all kinds of signs can be sent. And those are physical signs. And those are understandably very comforting because they're energetically discernible. But just as importantly, there are the internal signs. And by internal, I mean it's not something we see with our eyes or our five senses, but our sixth sense of intuition in our soul and in our heart. And that is when maybe we wake up and it's early in the morning, we're having our coffee, and that's a time when we usually had quiet moments with our cat on our lap. And you don't feel the impression of the cat on your lap, but in your heart, you feel the same energy you felt when your cat was on your lap. And that's when you think of anything you love doing with your animal, and I'm speaking to everybody now, you might think of each of those beloved activities, how they make me feel. Because it's not just the activity gives us something inside. It's a feeling of joy, maybe, a feeling of love, a feeling of contentment, maybe a feeling of pride when they won their agility class, or a feeling of fun when you practice agility with them. So that's my advice, is to become clear on what were some of the feelings you had that you miss having from your animal being present. And perhaps ask your animal if they could send you access to those feelings again, because it's the feelings that underlie all those behaviors we like so much, that we enjoyed so much when they were here. Now, does that make our grief disappear overnight? Absolutely not. But those kinds of things, the visits that are physically discernible or the non-physical ones, they do what I think of as taking that razor sharp edge off the pain of our grief. Grief cannot be bypassed by anything. People try to bypass it. There's something called the spiritual bypass, which I'm utterly opposed to. And it's when some New Age practitioners try to tell people, oh, you don't need to grieve. You know, your animal's fine on the other side, or your loved humans fine on the other side. So no need to grieve. Grief is a multi-dimensional process. And the two big ones are, it's an emotional process, which I think we all agree with, and it's a spiritual process. And when we have spiritual beliefs or spiritual experiences, like feeling them visit, those are very real and really help bring us a sense of peacefulness, even if it's in 2 moments. Those 2 moments are very strong, and they're going to help us while we're still in the throes of the emotional part of grief, but they're two different things, and they often will progress at different paces. Our emotional grief might last for a year. Our sense of spiritually understanding and accepting what happened may happen immediately. And that helps, but it doesn't make this part go away. So I hope that makes sense and may be helpful.
Yeah. Nancy, hi, Nancy wants to know if you can connect with living animals. Absolutely. I've had sessions with Teresa for current pets too.
Yeah, definitely.
Those are just super fun.
Yeah.
So, what's the weirdest animal or the most unusual animal you ever talked to? And what was the most unusual thing you ever heard from an animal?
Oh my gosh. Um, I wish we would have had this question early because I could have thought back in history. First of all, I certainly understand the question, but I wouldn't call any animal weird. I
Okay,
mean,
well,
there's some unusual animals,
right.
like
I don't mean
beyond the
weird,
cat, dog, whatever.
right. I mean, but like, could you
Um,
talk to spiders and scorpions and
oh,
yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
Okay,
I don't mean that they're weird. I meant like unusual.
okay. I just thought
Like,
of an example because the
right.
second part of the question was, and what did they say?
Yeah, was there, or it doesn't have to be from an unusual animal, but what was the most unusual thing you ever heard from a pet? Like,
Oh, okay.
or
Well,
anybody you
I'm
talk.
I'm going to combine those, and it was a snake. And I'll start this little story by saying there are two animals I'm afraid of: snakes and white sharks. And I snorkel a lot, and I will not dive. I live in Carmel, California, in one of the most beautiful diving places in the world called Monterey Bay. But there's a kelp forest there, which means you don't have high visibility. And we have white sharks. I don't dive here because of that, because I'm terrified of white sharks. I'm very scared of snakes. So I was in Big Sur, one of hundreds and hundreds of times I've hiked there some years ago. And I was at Julia Pfeiffer Burns State Park, if anybody listening knows that. And there's a blacktop parking lot. You have to sort of park in, walk through to get to the real trails. And I'm walking down. I'm always very careful about snakes on a warm day. And I looked down and I screamed because there was a snake, and it was only about this big. I had no reason to logically be scared, but I just have this fear of snakes. So I scream, and the snake's lying there and said, "Well, it's about time you showed up." And I said, "What?" And he or she, I'm going to call the snake he, because gender was not identified. But basically, we had this long conversation. The first thing I did was apologize for screaming because I could just feel from the snake he was insulted. Here I am, this 5'6" woman looking down this little snake. I mean, I could have probably stepped on the snake and killed it, which I never would do. But I recognized that he was feeling insulted, that I was so scared, that I screamed just at his presence. And so it took me back. I did step back a little bit because I was practically right on top of the snake. So I stepped back about a foot and I apologized if I insulted him by screaming. He said, "Well, you did insult me. I wouldn't hurt you." And I said, "Well, thank you. I'm really sorry about that." And I said, I tried to explain my fear of snakes. And he said to me, "Do you know how big you are?" And I said, "Do you mean compared to you?" And he goes, "Yeah."
Oh,
And
that's
I
so
said, "Yeah, I
funny.
do." And he said, "Do you know how ridiculous it is for you to be scared of me?" And he was what's called a California racer stripe or striped racer. And I took a picture, I looked it up. They're completely non-venomous, but I don't know. I'm not going to look down at a snake to see if there's a triangle head to see if it's a rattlesnake. I just leave. But anyway, he was a little insulted. And he said, "I didn't come here to hurt you." And I said, "Well, I'm so sorry. I just am so scared." And he said, "Do you know how big you are?" He said, "How do you think I feel?"
Oh my gosh, that
And
is
he said, and
you
get
should write a
this,
book with all these stories in it.
well, it's coming. But anyway, he said, "I was sent here and they didn't tell me why." And he showed bigger snakes. He said, because he was a baby, he said, "I was sent to come down here," and it's like a big cliff, "and just be on the side of this little road, this parking lot, and wait for a human who's going to be scared of me." And he said, "I thought that was the stupidest thing in the world. Why would I want to be with a human who's scared of me? And you come along and scream." And then we had this lovely conversation about unnecessary fear. And then I looked at him more, and he was so beautiful. His markings were so pretty. And I kept telling him that. And he got all proud and happy, and he thanked me. And then he said, I was told that you can do healing. Will you do some healing for me? I had a little accident and I'm sore. I said, sure. So I'm trained in Reiki and healing touch and therapeutic touch. So I didn't touch him. I wasn't ready to go that far. But I did sort of squat down so I was closer to him, and I used my hands and I sent him some healing. And he could just, I could feel him going, oh, oh, like it felt really good. And then I was told by my guides, my spirit guides, for you to really learn, you have to do this with your eyes closed. Now, by then, logically, I wasn't scared of this little guy, but to close my eyes being that close to a snake was a stretch. But I did it. I did it. And the snake was just so little, oh, this feels so good. Oh, thank you, thank you. In a million years, I never thought I would be doing this with a snake. Then my guide said, you're supposed to chant to him Om Namah Shivaya, which is a favorite chant that I use. And they said, stand back, put your hands in it over your chest, close your eyes, and chant Om Namah Shivaya to him. So I did for about 5 minutes, and the snake just loved it. And then time was going by. I was there with him for almost an hour doing this. And I was on my way to a hike, and I wanted to make sure I had enough daylight to do the hike because it was the afternoon. And I said, I'm so sorry, I need to go now. And he was like so sad that I was leaving. I said, I'm so sorry I have to leave, but thank you for this wonderful experience, and I love you. And he said he loved me. I started walking away, and I hear him say, please, please, can you come back and just do a little more? So I came back, I did a little more, and he said, okay, just go on your hike. But he said, you're not going to see any more snakes today. I was it. So it was just a very unexpected encounter. And did it like cure my fear of snakes? Well, not of big ones. I see little ones once in a while. I don't get scared of them anymore. But it was just a very holy experience for me to learn that we don't have to be scared of everyone. Now, I would go, well, I'm going to go along and start petting rattlesnakes. No, but it was a leveler, a leveler. This snake, as he told me, got the gift of knowing not to be scared himself with this big giant human who screams. And I got the gift of knowing I don't have to be terrified of every snake I see. And we had this very intimate encounter, which I'll never forget. So I hope that answers the person's
Yeah,
question.
that's a great story. Thank you. So Laura Beth says, how do we reach society and resensitize them to stop looking at animals in categories, since they're all suffering equally, while society looks at protecting only companion animals?
And not even that as fully as we should, in my
No, oh my
opinion.
gosh, not at all.
That's a very, very important question and issue. And I don't know whether I'm the best person to answer that in my roles. I think people who are specialists in humane education um, do that very well. But I would say, just in general, having watched myself evolve around this issue, evolve from trying to lecture and proselytize to people about how they should treat animals, and doing it by example. And when in discussion with somebody who participates in things that harm animals, is to feel, even temporarily, to feel and speak as non-judgmentally as possible. And even when we bring up the issue of what we eat, for years, it was extremely hard for me to not be judgmental about that issue. And I've evolved around that. Not that I mean, if I had my wish, if I could wave a magic wand tomorrow, no human would ever eat an animal or eat animal products ever again. And of course, we're seeing incredible progress with that because of people like you, Chef AJ, who are teaching people. But to get back to that question, I think, in my experience, it's best done when we can be in a place of non-judgment. And I'm thinking of somebody in my life right now who I love very, 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 very much, who doesn't eat the same diet I do. And I watch myself, and I've spoken to him about, there's no judgment about what you eat. I eat what I eat, And I take stuff with me almost everywhere I go because you never know what's going to be in a restaurant that you can eat. Even if it's going to a coffee place, I take my own oat milk creamer with me in my purse in a little container. And I do that very discreetly. But I think that there's this place from which, when we can come from a place of non-judgment of individuals, even when we wish the whole world behaved differently, I think that energy of non-judgment is more influential than energy of judgment. And that was very, very hard for me to come by. Very hard. And I'll give you a funny example. I have an old friend from many years ago who was such a hostile vegan when and she was a big executive for a company I won't mention, and she got away with this because she was so powerful. But when she would be sitting down for dinner with colleagues or whatever, and they'd eat meat, she would say things like, I saw her do this. Do you realize you're eating rotten flesh of a living, feeling being? Do you realize you're participating in the suffering of that animal and you're eating rotten flesh that's not good for you? I mean, that's an extreme, and I would definitely not recommend trying to influence people in that way.
It sounds like Linda Middlesworth, if you're watching. That's how, yeah.
I don't know. And do I understand? I mean, I would laugh when she would do it because I felt the same way at the time, but I just kind of knew that wasn't really going to influence people. So when it comes to one-on-one interactions, I think being careful and discerning about what we say to whom and in what way and when can help change the world more than hitting people over the head with a hammer. And it's interesting as my mindset about that changed, and not just what I say or don't say, but literally how I feel in my heart about it. Interestingly, I think it's influenced more people to make some shifts than the old me long ago who used a sledgehammer. Not the way my friend did, but in my own way. So I hope that answers the
Yeah,
question.
that's interesting because you were called Animals in Our Hearts, and that's if people want to make an appointment or get grief counseling or take a class, the link is in the show notes. You know, earlier you were talking about cloning, and that came up on last week's show with Dr. Doug Lyle because people were saying, well, when you clone a pet, it doesn't have the same personality. It may look exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. And I won't say I'm against cloning, but I will say this on a very practical level, on an emotional level. If what somebody wants is to experience being in a physical lifetime again with the soul of their animal who died, save your money. Don't, because when you clone, you're going to get the same DNA, but it may not be the same soul. And the soul can return to us from the spirit world in another body, even if the body doesn't look anything like the old body, without cloning. Reincarnation is not cloning. It's when the soul returns to earth in a new body. And sometimes that body looks very similar, sometimes it doesn't. I've had black cats all my life, with one exception. I had a Himalayan long ago. It was in black or black and white. And part of it is I love black cats. But when I speak to one of my cats the other side about coming back, first and foremost, I ask them if that's what they want. Sometimes they've already told me, but if I want them to come back and we haven't discussed it yet, I begin that conversation with, would you like to? And if you do, there's an open door. Let's talk. And if they say yes, which not all of my cats have done, then we start talking about timing that's good and what they might want to look like. And they tell me what they want to look like. I don't tell them what I want them to look like. But here's another thing that might be worth talking about. And that is, even when there's been great love in a given relationship with us and an animal, that doesn't mean they always reincarnate. And why is that? Does that mean they don't love us as much as the ones who reincarnate? No. When a soul comes back to earth, it is primarily to have a new experience of the soul incarnated in a body on earth. And many times, yes, the animals we've loved come back to be with us. And that's a beautiful, wondrous reunion on earth. But when an animal doesn't come back to us, but they still come back to earth in another form, that's nothing to be insulted about. It means that their soul needed a new experience for their soul to continue to evolve and learn and grow. I'll give you an example. The Himalayan cat I mentioned who I had, beautiful little girl named Anastasia. She died when she was 4 years old from congenital kidney disease. I found out later because the breeder overbred. And of course, I've never bought an animal from a breeder since then. I always rescue animals, but I didn't know better then. Anyway, she was buried in a very sacred spot in a forest, and I used to go there every week, then every month. On the year anniversary of her death, I went there and we were talking, and she said, because she would tell me a lot about her life in the spirit world, which was very enjoyable to me. But that day on her 1 year anniversary, she said, Mommy, look, I have a new body. And thank God a whole year had gone by, because had it been a week or a month, I probably would have been hurt that she had come to me. But a year went by and my grief was beautifully healed at that point. And I said, oh, show me. And when she was a Himalayan, she was absolutely indefinably gorgeous, just gorgeous. And what she showed me was she was a cat that was what we might call a calico. She was white with some blotches of black and gray, and they weren't symmetrical. Well, I think all animals are beautiful, but just like with humans, some animals are like drop dead beautiful when you look at them and whatever. Well, she was that kind of gorgeous as a Hemi. And in her new body, she wasn't that gorgeous. And what she said to me was, Mommy, I would have loved to come back to you, but it was time for me to learn more. What I learned from you, and she told me that was her first lifetime on earth. And she said, I intentionally came to you because I knew I'd be unconditionally loved. I knew I'd be well taken care of and spoiled. But I had that. She said, and one thing that happened when I was with you is everybody who saw me, and this was true, commented on my physical beauty first. And sometimes they didn't even see me beyond my physical beauty. And so I wanted to know, and this is a quote, I wanted to know what it was like to be ordinary looking. So I came in the body I'm showing you because it's ordinary looking. I didn't want to be valued just because I was pretty or beautiful. And then, thank God, she said, I know you didn't value me just for that, but it's true. Every one of my friends, whoever met her, that's what they saw, just like with beautiful humans. But a lot of them never got to know her beyond that because it was so striking. So she said, I wanted to be ordinary. And she said, also, here's my new family. And it was like this Ozzie and Harriet family. There was a husband and a wife, there's a teenage boy, a preteen girl, and a golden retriever. And she said, with you, I was your world. I was your world, me and the other cat. I wanted to know what it was like to not be the center of a human's world, but to be a pet. Because to me, she was a baby. She was a child. She was a family member. And she said, don't worry, these people treat me really well. I can eat whatever I want. The dog loves me. The kids love me. So she was loved, but it was a family that believed in the hierarchy, as I call it, where humans are here and animal companions are here. And she said, I just wanted to have that experience, to know what that was like, to be loved, but not as your child. It's just an experience I wanted, and it's working well. So I loved her story, and it's a great example, in my opinion, about how when the soul returns to earth, it's first and foremost designed around what that soul next wants to experience and learn. And I give her a lot of credit because she's just going to come back another really had a really easy life with me, no matter what she looked like. But she chose to learn some challenging things. So anyway, I hope that responds to the question.
It's so interesting. I got to watch this show again because it's so interesting. You know, Kathy was watching live on YouTube saying, I go through such a deep depression after I lose one of my animals. I feel like I lose a piece of my heart. And it's just so different than, you know, it's not that I, you know, was happy when my parents or my brother died, but it's just the way the pets, they're just so we're so, you know, because we're with them all, or at least hopefully, you know, you're with them all the time. I mean, I mean, especially since the pandemic, I don't think I'm ever not with Bailey, you know?
Mhm. And so is the question, if you can tell, AJ, is the question about, is this depression normal or what can I do about it?
Well, no, I think she's just making a comment. And I think a lot of times where people's feelings are minimized when it's a pet, you know, because it's just an animal. And the thing is
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
those of us that have loved a pet. And I feel bad for people that have never known that love, because it's
Yeah,
so like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
I think it's more unconditional than a child personally.
Yeah, it is. And um, I think that's one reason any of us can have times of depression, um, or any aspect of grief. And depression is a very, very normal, common part of grieving. That doesn't say everybody feels it, but it's very, very common and normal. And the issue of why it feels different than when this person's parents died, I don't know the whole story, so I can't say accurately why that is. But as you talked about, AJ, it very often is because animals are such masters at loving unconditionally. And no matter how well intentioned most humans are, it's harder for us as humans to love unconditionally. And to give humans credit, our human to human relationships are a little more complex, um, with different needs and desires and expectations. Not that we don't have any of that with our animals, but it's a different kind of relationship. So, and they give us gifts that are harder for some humans to give. I'm 70 years old, and it's only recently that I am experiencing the love of a human that matches the love of animals, because it's a rare thing. And so when we lose our animals and we lose what for many people is the strongest, if not only, source of unconditional love in their lives, of course it's depressing. Of course it elicits a lot of grief. And AJ, you struck on something a minute ago too when you said we're treated differently when people say it's just a pet. Something
It's just
else,
a dog, you hear that. Oh, it's
just a
oh,
dog, whatever, or go get another one.
yeah.
What that speaks to is an issue in grief called disenfranchisement. And disenfranchised losses are the kinds of losses where the relationship itself, i.e., animal person, is not really validated or sanctioned or fully approved of by our current culture. Um, so it's the relationship itself isn't really valued. It was just isn't seen as that important, not as important as the human ones. It also is when the loss that somebody experiences is seen by the culture as just not so important. And this isn't just about animals. I mean, during the height of the AIDS epidemic, and all the horrible HIV deaths, same thing happened there. I mean, it's only fairly recently that people in that community, um, have rights to get married, have rights to own homes together, have rights to estates and so forth. So, in that world of uh, gays and all that that encompasses, um, so many people had disenfranchised losses because society didn't acknowledge the legitimacy of the relationship and therefore didn't acknowledge the legitimacy of the loss. So that's one way. And another one in the human culture is what we call miscarriage. And miscarriage is a word I don't even like because when a woman loses a child, it's losing a child. It's not losing tissue. It's not losing a pregnancy. It's losing a child.
Hmm.
And when I go to conferences on grief, and that's not work that I do. I certainly don't specialize in child loss, but a lot of people do. When I hear their stories, what I hear is that the only pregnancy loss that is typically acknowledged, that people say, yes, they're getting a lot of acknowledgement and support around, is a stillborn birth. Because then the baby at least was term and everybody comes around the mother and the father and they care. But when a woman has a miscarriage, the things they hear are, oh, try again.
Well, yeah, tell me
Well,
about it.
thank goodness it only happened in the first trimester or the beginning of the second trimester. And that happened to me twice. And I got all that stuff. Oh, we'll just try again. Or you're young, blah, blah, blah. That's a disenfranchised loss because people say stupid, uncaring things that make us feel worse. So taking those examples you probably all can relate to in some way with ourselves or other people, and you take it back to the animal companion world, it's the same thing. The relationship. Now, let me go back. Within this wonderful insular world we have of animal lovers, of course those losses are acknowledged. And hopefully everybody listening has people in their life so that when they go through loss, they will be supported by people who get it, who understand. Um, but not everybody does. And so outside that insular circle of animal lovers who get it and understand, there are people who aren't going to get it. And they'll say stupid things like, oh, we'll get another dog. Or, well, how old was your dog? Oh, 18. Oh, well, thankfully you had them all those years, which might be a thought we have, but nobody should ever say such a thing to anybody else. When my father died, and I was at this thing my parents' religion called a viewing, where the body was viewed in a coffin, and then the family stood in line, and all these people who came and walked by to say things to us. Trust me, nobody looked at my mother and said, oh, Emily, I'm really sorry you lost Fred, but you can go get another husband. Nobody said that to her, of course. But people say that to animal people all the time. Well, there's all these animals at the shelter need homes. You should go look at one as soon as possible, as if doing that is going to make our grief disappear. No loved one can be replaced. It just doesn't work that way, as we know. So if I could give any encouragement or advice around that issue, it would be, if this is happening to you now or ever, where you're feeling very disenfranchised by things people say to you, seek people who do understand. And if you aren't lucky enough to have people in your family or your significant other in your inner circle who truly get it, then go to other places. There are support groups. Just Google pet loss support groups. There are probably at least a dozen of them that you can go and join, where they might be strangers to you, but they will share the same values you do about animals and the loss of animals, and they will get it. There are lots and lots of books. I have a lot of articles on my blog, if that interests any of you. The blog is called animalsoulsmatter.com. There are a dozen articles on grief that can help you through that with some practical tools, some spiritual issues that you might want to read that could help you. So when we aren't getting the support we all deserve when an animal dies from the sources we wish it came from, it's normal for that to elicit disappointment or heartbreak or anger or whatever, and that has to be dealt with. But for God's sakes, don't let that stop you from reaching out for support from people who do understand. And that's the great value of support systems, which was studied many decades ago. There was a big, important study on breast cancer in the 70s. And these women were asked, what was your greatest form of support when you went through this? And these are women who all happened to be in a support group for breast cancer survivors. It wasn't the spouse, it wasn't the best friend, it wasn't their religious leader, it wasn't friends. It was people who were going through the same thing. I used to lead a lot of support groups, and something magical happens in those groups because people who are otherwise strangers connect right here. And you can feel very understood and cared for from people in your shoes. So there's always support out there. It just might not be immediately or ever from the sources from which you most want it. So,
I really appreciate you talking about miscarriages. I had 4 of them, and one of them was literally yeah, it's okay. One of them was literally 2 days before the baby would have been a live birth. Her name was Rachel. And people actually said to me, and I couldn't find any kind of grief support because they didn't have it for people, like if it wasn't at least stillborn. And they said, well, it wasn't a real baby. Yeah, I know. And it's still hard. I mean,
I'm so sorry.
I know it's like,
yeah,
it's how many, 20, 24 years later.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry both for your loss and that people around you said such horrible things. It makes it worse. It makes it worse. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. That's why, gosh, anyway, I just wish they lived longer. I wish our pets just lived longer.
I know. It's one of the things we go into it knowing is that we're likely going to say goodbye to them far sooner than we wish we would. And it's heartbreaking and heart-wrenching. and very difficult to navigate before and after. And yet, when I was talking earlier about there's a spiritual process of loss and grief and the emotional cannot be bypassed. We have to go through grief. There's no going around it. But when we seek a spiritual understanding about it in ways that have meaning to us, not somebody else imposing it on us, that really can help a bit. When we are willing to look at things like, why did they come into my life? What was I meant to learn from them? What did they mean to give to me and being in my life? What did I give to them? Which is equally important, by the way. There's an exercise I had in my Legacies of Love class on healing grief, where I had people write a list of the gifts their animal gave them. And people just write furiously when they're told to do that, make long lists. And then I had them write a list of the gifts they gave their animal. They write these tiny little lists, or they say, I don't know whether I gave them anything, but they gave me all of this. And then I have them do an empty chair exercise where they pretend they're themselves, and in the empty chair is their animal, and they read the list and they tell their animal how grateful they are for all the gifts they gave them. Then I have them shift chairs. And this is a stretch for some people, but they do it. I had them just for a few moments pretend they're their animal. Try to put themselves in their skin when they were here in the earth and picture themselves as their animal, what it was like to live with you, the person, what it was like, and what they're grateful for, what gifts they received. And by then, people can start to access that. And that's really important for healing because no significant relationship is one way. The gifts are always mutual in a big relationship. Maybe some of the gifts on one side tend to be bigger or more measurable, but that doesn't matter. There are gifts naturally both ways when there's been such love. And that can be very healing to access that. And here's another reason I say that. The gifts our animals give us, there is always an energy that's part of each of those gifts. And that energy of those gifts is ours to keep forever and ever and ever. We may never be with them again in their old body. We'll be with their soul again. But the underlying energy of their gifts is ours to keep forever. Forever. Doesn't make grief go away, but it makes it a lot more bearable and palatable.
Thank you. So Kathy says, will my fur baby find my husband in heaven when she departs?
My short answer is yes. I've been told hundreds of stories about how when a person, an animal, or an animal, an animal, a person love each other very much on earth, there is an inevitable reunion in heaven, by whatever you call it. But I want to read you a story. I have all these stories ready to talk about, and I didn't share half of them at this point.
You know what? Just come back, because the people that resonate with this and love this, we can, if this is not something that interests you, it's not my typical show, that's okay. We can still do this. It's because a lot of people don't believe in reincarnation.
Yeah,
I always heard people
understandably.
say, do you believe in reincarnation? No, but I did in my last life.
Oh, that's good. Did you make that up? That's very good.
It's an old joke,
I
actually.
never heard that. But regarding the meeting, absolutely, it just happens. And I can't find the particular story in it really quickly now. But one thing that I hear a lot is that, yes, I was met by Daddy, or I was met by Fufu, who was the other golden retriever, or whatever. But the energy, what I hear is there's such love in those reunions. And it's not just love, there's celebration. There's a real polar difference between when our beloved animal dies and we're on earth grieving. It's such a heavy, heavy, difficult energy. But when the soul goes the other side, it's exactly the opposite. There is truly celebration. There's celebration. And the story I couldn't quite find, I remember just a little bit of it. There was a dog named Hoover, who was a lab. And his person said, well, did anybody meet you? And goes, oh, yeah, so and so and so and so. And like he started naming all the dogs they ever had. And he said, Mom, we had a party. we had a big party and it went on and on and on. I don't always hear the word party, but the energy of the soul leaving is so joyous. They're always so whole and vital. And there's often also a sense of release from a body, especially when it's been ill, um, or when there's been a difficult death, and there's been pain. So, but I would say it's almost a given to the person who asked that question. Oh, hi, Bailey.
Yeah, Bailey wants
But
it.
yeah,
We're probably gonna end soon. Bailey wanted to say
okay.
hi. So yeah,
Oh, he's so cute.
thank you. But
Um,
she's a she, just in case you,
Gee, I'm sorry.
that's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
But she gets that a lot, but you probably know that.
I do, but I do it all the time with my clients because I feel the energy of male or female energy and
No,
whatever's prominent at the moment, I feel
I think she's more of a boy energy. She pees like a
it.
boy, so yeah, and you got a boy's name supposedly, or anyway. Nice.
Well, is there one final question or anything you'd like me
Well,
to
just,
comment on?
I'm wondering though, with the grief counseling, is it more like a one-on-one or is it a class? Because I'm almost feeling like I should take it now so that when she does make her
Uh,
transition, I don't know if I could ever
Well,
be
it's
prepared.
both. I definitely provide one-on-one counseling, whether it's anticipatory grief beforehand or afterwards or during the acute hospice stage. But there are also classes. There's a teleclass I have called Legacies of Love, and it's, I think, 8 hours long and 4 different sections, and it really helps do a couple things. It's designed to help people learn tools, very specific practical tools to navigate their way through grief emotionally and spiritually. And it also provides a place to just become more aware of the nuances of one's grief and to address them in ways that are helpful. So that can be found on my website, which is animalsinourhearts.com. There's a whole section on workshops, and there are also classes on understanding euthanasia, how to help our animals through the hospice process, all a whole array of classes that might be of interest. So
Yeah.
I hope
And if
that'll be
people
helpful.
want to connect with you, though, that information is just shown out. Do you have any social media presence or anything like that?
I do. I have a Facebook group on pet loss, so they can just look up my name, pet loss Facebook, and it will pop up.
I'll find that and put it in the
Yeah,
show notes.
yeah.
So
I'm not nearly as active as I should be on that, but
right. Well, you're busy because yeah, it's very hard sometimes to get an appointment with you. So well, we have to make one, Bailey. So to you can, I don't want her to come back. I just don't want her to leave, you know?
yeah, 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 yeah.
They're the best. Well, thank you so much. It's just been lovely talking to
Mm.
you, getting to know you,
Well,
and actually
thank
just
you.
seeing you. I mean, I've known you for years, but this is I didn't even
You
know
know,
what
it's
you
fun
looked
to
like.
see. Well, I've seen you, of course, but
Right. But I
it's
had no
fun to meet
idea
again
what
like
you
this.
looked like. So thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Teresa. It was just
Thank
really,
you.
really, really made me feel happy to talk to you.
Yeah.
And yeah, are you familiar with Sylvia Brown?
Yes, yes.
So I read one of her books, and I don't know if this is true. And again, people that don't believe this, they're not going to believe anything we say anyway. But she said something of when we, as the human, makes our transition, that every pet we lost is like right there waiting for us, like all at
Oh,
the same time. And if that's
yeah,
true, that would be amazing because then I would
yeah,
have Snoopy, Lucky, Scooby, Ginger,
yeah,
Sparky. Like I
yeah,
mean, because in life, your
yeah.
pets are never there at the same time.
It's very, very typical. Very typical. Do you time for one more
Yeah.
story?
Oh, I have all day,
Okay,
but I want
okay.
to respect your time. Sure.
Because this involves a lot of animals lining up the way you're talking. My best friend, whose name was Martha, passed away about 16 years ago. And I was very privileged. She had cancer, and I was very privileged to be with her last 36 hours alone. And she was pretty much in a comatose state on her bed, and I was in this chair just staying up watching in case she needed something. And she had lots and lots of animals over the years. And one of them was her little corgi named Lucy, who, while I was in the room, was on the bed with Martha at the foot of the bed. And I'm sort of like watching what's happening. And two very interesting things happened in one evening. One, and this was in Carmel, California, and I started hearing crickets. And I don't mean like two crickets, I mean like thousands of crickets making that beautiful sound they make. And I'm thinking, I know I'm tired, and this is a very, very big situation I'm in. Maybe I'm hallucinating. because we don't have crickets in December when she was dying. We have them in like August in this area. So I asked to be connected to a representative of this cricket group making all these beautiful sounds. And they said to me, Martha loved all the animals and all the beings on this property from the day she came. And we came tonight to sing her home. These weren't crickets in bodies, they were crickets on the other side, little insects, because she loved every being on that property. So that was the first thing that happened. Then, soon after that, Lucy, the little dog at her feet, all of a sudden got a little agitated and looked up, and she said to me, look. And I looked up at the ceiling above the bed, and there was Zephyr and Buster, a lab and a cat who had died quite a bit before that. And they said to Lucy and me, we're here now for her. We've got her. We've got her. They came to help her leave. And Lucy said, okay, my job's done. And she got off the bed because she had said her goodbyes to Martha many times. And then later, when Martha actually did the full transition, and she showed me every animal she ever loved was lined up waiting, every single animal. And so that's very, very common for that to happen. It's also very common for animals on the other side to be the ones who come to help them make that journey. And then there are often many others, not that it's a linear process, but it's very hard to describe it in a non-linear way. But once the person or the animal has fully transitioned, then there are often many more beings there to meet and greet them. It's quite a beautiful thing to behold.
Thank you, Teresa. It was such a pleasure talking to you, and I can't
wonderful.
wait
Thank you.
more encounters like this, and for your book to come out. And anytime you have a class or something, I'm happy to tell people about it.
I'll be happy. Thank you. Thank you so
thank
much. You take care. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and blessings to everybody out there who loves their animals, and blessings to you when you lose them.
And thank you for being vegan.
Oh, yes.
And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow a little later at 2 p.m. Pacific time for Feeling Great with Lissa and Nate. They're going to be making a sprouted chickpea curry, and they're going to show you how to sprout beans.